So welcome to this course in practical yoga philosophy, and in this course I'm going to outline what I consider some of the foundations of yoga as a practical way of life. So often when people hear the word yoga, these days often people have encountered yoga through yoga posture classes, and they think that yoga means standing on your head or touching your toes, wrapping your legs around your neck, this type of thing. Other people think that yoga means being chilled or relaxed. Other people associate it with, let's say, the mantra Om, or with things that they perceive as being rather strange or a bit like a religion. And the reasons people think these things are quite understandable, but the reasons they think them, or at least from my perspective, are because they've not really been exposed to what yoga really is. Now, when we talk about yoga, you have to remember that we're talking about something that's very ancient. Now, when things have been around for a long time, they usually only stay alive for a long time because they maintain their relevance. They count somehow at a deep level. Now, yoga is a Sanskrit word. Sanskrit is the ancient language of the land that we now call India. And Sanskrita, means literally well done, well made. And Sanskrit is the language of yoga, and the language we might say, of the whole traditional Indian system. Yoga means basically to join. The English word junction, join, has come from the Sanskrit root, is derived from the Sanskrit root yuj, which gives us words like yoga and yukta, which means connected. So yoga has also given us the English word yoke, Y-O-K-E. When I first heard, yoga has given us the English word yoke, I thought they were talking about the yolk of an egg. And I thought yoga means this state of being centered. It's the heart of things. And yoga practice means to come back to the heart that connects all the parts. And there may be something in that, as we will get to shortly. However, Y-O-K-A, yoke, is come from this Sanskrit root yuj. And yoke, Y-O-K-E, I hadn't already heard this word when I first started studying yoga. Even though I grew up in a place where there are quite a lot of farm animals, you didn't see farm animals dragging carts around. There were these mechanized tractors where I grew up. But since then, in India, I've witnessed quite often oxen pulling a cart. And between the oxen and the cart, there is what we could call a yoke. It is a device that serves to join and connect the beast, the oxen, and the cart, and the things the cart is carrying. So yoga means to join, it means to connect, it means to bring together, it means to bring into oneness. But the particular characteristic of yoke, Y-O-K, as opposed to join, is that when we yoke things, we allow them to be brought into togetherness, we allow them to be joined, so they can move together in a common direction. So yoga practice, we could say, is about joining all the parts of ourself, bringing ourselves into unity. That's one way that yoga is often translated or described. So we can feel we no longer have the need to go anywhere, because we're quite happy where we are, because we feel whole, we feel oneness, we feel what they call in Sanskrit kaivalya, which gets translated as all oneness, aloneness, that's not at all lonely, it's whole. So the idea is, yoga means to bring everything into togetherness, to bring everything into wholeness, or we might say to bring it all into harmony. Now, if we're going to bring everything into harmony, what does that mean? if we're going to join everything, what does that mean practically? Sometimes people talk about yoga means joining the individual with everything, becoming one with the universe. Sometimes people talk about joining the individual soul with the supreme soul or the ultimate reality. Now this sounds, depending on your point of view and your, let's say, your temperament and your proclivities, that might sound very alluring. It might also sound rather fantastical or far-fetched or even something ridiculous for some people of some particular viewpoints. But never mind. First of all, if we're going to join, it means we have to join all the parts of ourselves. So whether you are of the persuasion that allows you to even permit the reality that you could become connected to something outside yourself, first of all, we have to join all the parts of ourselves here and now. So joining, bringing into togetherness, gathering all parts of ourselves. Yes, all the parts. All the parts. Even those parts of ourselves that habitually we preferred not to look at. Even those parts of ourselves that we're ashamed of. Even those parts of ourselves that scare us. All of it. Because yoga is interested in inviting unity. And the only real unity is one that includes all the parts. Now, if we're going to invite all the parts into togetherness, first thing we've got to do is get to know all the parts. Acknowledge all the parts. And so interestingly enough, we could say that yoga begins when we acknowledge and own the fact that we don't really know all of ourselves. Have you ever done anything that deep down you didn't want to do? Have you ever gone to bed one day with a very clear resolution the next morning to do a particular thing, and then woken up the next day to find out that the person who's woken up has no interest in doing what the person who went to bed the previous day was so intent on? I certainly have. Have you ever felt part of you wants to go in one direction, other parts of you would like to go in a different direction completely, other parts you prefer to stay where you are? This is a very common human experience. So there's the idea that we don't quite know ourselves. And often we have preferred not to really look into the depths of who we are, because that scares us, because that's not quite so convenient. That would disturb the ease of operating within our established comfort zone. However, sooner or later in life, the rules that we have lived by, the comfort zone within which we have operated, often it can happen that we have experiences that prove to us beyond a doubt that is no longer resistible that this comfort zone is not really comfortable. This amalgam of habitual patterns is no longer really serving us. It's not allowing us to live as we would like to live. And so we get the idea, I don't quite know myself. Sometimes I do things that I don't want to do. Why? And once we acknowledge that fact, then yoga can begin. Yoga begins when we know and we acknowledge that we do not know. Because when we acknowledge that we don't know, we create space to look in new ways. And this looking in new ways is one of the absolute foundations of yoga. We could say the basic practice of yoga is to keep inviting ourselves to look in ways that reach beyond our habitual ways of looking. In the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the great and foundational texts and most treasured texts of the yoga tradition, the very first imperative verb, a verb that is being used as an injunction or an instruction, is pasya. And pasya means look. In the Aditya, which is another hymn of instruction in the yoga tradition, it's part of the great Ramayana epic, which communicates the teachings of yoga in a wonderfully resonant, rich, and very compelling and engaging archetypal adventure, epic story of Rama. There's a moment in this epic where Rama, it's basically do or die time. It's high noon. He's facing the greatest challenge he's ever faced. And even great Rama, who has achieved a lot by this time, feels unsure of himself. He's about to meet basically what we could describe as his alter ego, Ravana, on the battlefield. He's already seen Ravana, and when he saw him, he was shaken because he'd never realized that there could be anybody so mighty, so formidable as this Ravana. You could say that Rama is seeing his own potential for destruction, for devastation, for havoc and chaos. He has tremendous potential for harmony, to support the well-being of the whole. But those same capacities, if they are used in a different way, they could have a very different effect. And so we could say at this moment, Rama is basically face to face with his dark side. He's at this great archetypal moment, and he's shaken by it. And a great sage, Agastya, comes to give him some counsel. And he teaches him this hymn of instruction, which is a hymn to the sun, symbolic of the light of consciousness. And in this hymn, the first verb, the first imperative verb is shrinu. So we had pasya in the Bhagavad Gita, meaning look. And here in the Aditya Hridayam, we have the imperative verb shrinu, which means listen. So we could say that the basic yoga practice, one way we could think of it, is what is called in England, where I grew up, the Green Cross Code. So sometimes people have this idea that yoga philosophy is something rather complex, but really it's very simple. It's very, very practical, as we will see as we go on. But the basic principles, so practical. Now, we mentioned already this yoga posture business, yoga asana. Asana is the Sanskrit word for seat, the seat of our awareness. And asana also refers to the practice of moving the body in space in particular ways that help activate and invite energy and information to flow through this system, this field of our being, this field of our awareness, our bodily born conscious system, in ways that facilitate balance, harmony, and easeful, effective, and efficient communication. Now, once I was in India, and a teacher whose class I was sitting on, he said, you have to remember, asana is kindergarten yoga. But the way I understood it, he wasn't saying that asana is something childish or to be discarded once you get to a certain age. On the contrary, what he was saying was that asana is a place, is a way of inquiry, is a tool with which, through which, we can really help establish and deepen our embodied understanding of the foundation principles of yoga. So you think about it. Sometimes people say all the important things, you learn them in kindergarten. If you were fortunate enough to go to a good kindergarten or infant school, as we call it where I grew up, in the infant school, you learn some really important things about how to behave in society, how to behave with other people in order to be able to get on and be productive and efficient and work together so everybody does a bit better. Now, one thing that I learned in the infant school, the kindergarten, was what we called in England the Green Cross Code. And the Green Cross Code is basically how to safely cross the road. And the idea of the Green Cross Code is stop, look both ways, and listen. Stop, look, and listen. And this is basically, I would say, one way we could consider the foundation principles of yoga practice. Stop, not in the sense of becoming static, but giving yourself, affording yourself enough space to pause and check. As you go into action, as you make choices in life, check. Am I running on autopilot? Am I a slave to my habitual patterned grooves of behaviour? Or am I really acting here in a way that is attuned to my deeper longing? Is my action the honest, authentic expression of the longings of my body, my heart, my soul, and my conscience? Or am I just doing what I think I should do, or what I have become habituated to do, even if perhaps it's no longer serving me? So stop in the sense of check in regularly and look, really look. Because it's very easy in life to live with blinkers on. This is a useful thing. So much information. Habits are very helpful. They help us get things done. But like many of the amazing power tools of our conscious system, habits have a dangerous side, a dark side. They're like dual-edged swords or power tools. Power tools can make the job a lot easier, but if we don't use them with due care, they can wreck the job and harm us. So habits, yes, can be very useful, but habits can also be limiting. So the idea in yoga is let us practice looking in ways that reach beyond our habitual ways of looking. Let us really inquire and then listen. So the idea in Sanskrit, or in the Indian system, is that we live in space. We live in the realm of the elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space. And earth, water, fire, and air exist in space. We exist in space, but this space is not empty. Sometimes people say that science emerged in the last 500 years in Europe, but I don't really buy that, having given some attention to the Indian tradition. Because in the Indian tradition, there were research scientists thousands of years ago. Basic atomic theory is there in Indian schools of philosophy that were set down in written texts thousands of years ago. The Indian research scientists, known as rishis, they stopped, they looked, they listened. They inquired deeply, they observed nature within and all around, and they came to what is now referred to in Sanskrit as Veda. That which was revealed to them, that which they recognized, that which they saw or perceived. So the idea in the Indian system is that Veda is not authored information, it is revealed information. Now, when I first encountered this idea, I thought it was rather strange. What can that possibly mean? How can you have a text without an author? But then one of my Sanskrit teachers gave me a lovely example to illustrate. They said, James, it's just like one of your people. I'm from the UK, what's he talking about? Isaac Newton. He did not author his laws of motion. He was observing nature, and the story goes the apple hit him on the head, and he got it, he saw it, he recognized these laws of physics. They were there before he recognized them, and they're still there now, operating within certain levels of reality. He just recognized them because he was looking scientifically and he was paying close attention. Now, the idea in the Indian system is that this space that we live in is not empty. The research scientists of the ancient Indian system came to the same conclusion that the quantum physicists arrived at in the 20th century in Europe. This space that we inhabit is not empty, but it contains sound, movement, a vibration. And so we could say that the space we inhabit contains sound. So when we listen, it can help us perceive vaster fields. So stop, look, listen. Use all your senses. Use all your sense powers to check in with reality. Now, in the Indian system, the power of listening or hearing, it stands in a group of 5. Listening, sensing with the sense power of touch, seeing with the sense power of vision, tasting with the sense power of taste, and smelling with the sense power of smell. So when we hear stop, look, listen, this reminds us to look not just with our eyes, not just with the most immediate or obvious of our senses that help us see, but when we have listen, it reminds us that to look in ways that reach beyond our habitual ways of looking, we have to use all our sense powers. And this is the idea of yoga, is to practice operating as a whole unit. So we mentioned the idea of yoga is joining. It's gathering all the parts. So the basic yoga practice, we've mentioned stop, look, listen, but another way we could consider the basic yoga practice is to do whatever we are doing with every part of ourself. To invite our bodily powers and our sense powers and our mental, intellectual and emotional powers to all function as one. And then this is yoga. So, gathering all the parts, what parts are we talking about? So yoga recognizes we're basically constituted to some degree of the same things as the world we inhabit. We're constituted of the elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. Is this true? We have an earthy element to ourselves. We also have a watery element. Blood is circulating, energy is flowing through our bodies, information is flowing through our bodies. At school I was told I was about 70% water, which incidentally alerts us to the primary importance of moving. In contemporary society, it's not unusual for many people to do jobs or spend many parts of their days in which they sit in one position. We've not really evolved for that. What happens to water when it doesn't move? It stagnates. So we need to move. I'm of the persuasion that movement is actually a basic human need, just like we need food and water and reasonably good quality air. We need to move. This is part of a healthy diet. It's a part of what maintains this home of our body in decent working order. That's an aside anyway. So we have an earthy element, we have a watery element. Fire, do we have fire? Of course. How are we digesting everything we digest? And of course, fire shows up also in our emotional life. It drives our commitment to do things. And fire illuminates. It gives us that spark of insight. And of course, we have an internal engine that keeps us warm. Air, obviously, we have air circulating through us. Air is also associated in the system with that which allows things to move and to communicate between one another, just as sound travels in the air. And just as the air allows, for example, seeds to spread and reach different places. So air is associated with communication. And we exist in space. And this is what the quantum physicists also agree. We exist in space. Now in the Indian system, these 5 elements also have associated with them realms of the senses. There's the earth has fragrance, water has sweet taste, fire, being bright, is associated with the field of vision. Air, we can feel it with a sense of touch, which leaves space associated with sound. And this is one of the reasons why sound-based practices are so treasured in the Indian tradition. Because there's the idea, if we want to cultivate harmony through the whole field, that might involve, let's say, cleansing, purifying, harmonizing different parts of ourselves. So if we want to clean the physical layer, let's say you go into the city, it's very dusty and hot, you get home, what do you want to do? You want to bathe, you want to have a shower, use the element of water to clean the element of the earth, to clear away the dust. Now let's say it was a hot day, you don't just want to use the water to clean yourself, you also want to drink it. Now these days many people have access to clean water from the tap, but if you live in a place where you weren't so sure about the quality of the water from the tap, what might you do before you drink it? Subject the water to the element of fire, boil it to purify it. And then, you know, your room's got really hot, the fire, and there's a bit of smoke, and it's, you know, it's hot and smoky, so you open the window and let the air clean away the element of fire. Now, if you want to clean earth, water, fire and air, what do we use? Sound. Because sound penetrates, sound pervades. And this is one of the reasons why sound-based practices, which I will share some of as we go on, are so treasured in the Indian tradition. So we have the elements and we have the sensory realms associated with them. Now, in the realm of the physical human being, the incarnate human being, the incarnate sentient human, we also have what are called in Sanskrit Indriyaha. Now, Indriyaha are the powers of Indra. Now, archetypally in the Indian system, Indra is the god, the Vedic god of thunder. His weapon is the thunderbolt. And he's the king of heaven. Now imagine for a moment you're the king of heaven. Now heaven in the Indian system is very interesting to know. In Sanskrit, everything is defined. One of the ways that heaven is defined in the Indian system is as a place in which desires are more or less instantaneously realized. Now imagine you're the king of heaven. Heaven being a place where desires are more or less instantaneously realized. What do you get used to? Getting what you want. If you don't get what you want, how do you feel? Not so happy. What does that sound like? Human beings, we get into patterns, yeah? And when things don't fit into our habitual ways of operating, we might not feel so happy about it. So this is a little bit like Indra. Also, there's the idea that human beings, from the perspective of the Indian tradition, we have what we might call divine powers. Now, what do I mean when I say divine powers? The way I understand it is we have these powers that help us see. They're divine because they allow us to experience and to some degree create. So we have these amazing powers that allow us, for example, to speak and express ourselves. So this relates to the realm of speech, but also our capacity to communicate with our movement and our body and the tone of our voice and with sounds. We also have the capacity to pick things up and put things down. We have these opposing thumbs. So the high linguistic capacity and the opposing thumbs and the extraordinary manipulative capacities and our capacity to use tools are two of the very particular characteristic features of the human being. So speech or expression, which is called in Sanskrit vak, and pani, the manipulative capacities, picking up, putting down. We also have pada, the locomotive capacity, the capacity to move, and we are bipeds. In the whole animal kingdom, we're rather extraordinary. So pada is the whole realm of movement, and we can move really in lots of different ways. If we think about it, when we compare ourselves to most animals, For example, I remember one time I was rock climbing in a place called Krabi in Thailand, where there's lots of beautiful climbing routes near to the sea. I was a beginning climber, I still am, but I was on a big rock face with lots of different routes, including ones that were much more challenging, not so suitable for beginners like me. But next to the relatively easy route that I was on with my instructor, just next door, just along the rock face, there was a much more difficult route. Along came an Italian guy who'd grown up in the Dolomites, and he looked like he was walking up effortlessly this very difficult route. He'd been climbing since he was 4 years old. But then some monkeys came along and made this expert climber look very slow and not particularly competent. When I was a boy, I used to run a lot. Well, I still enjoy running. And I had some friends who were very fast runners. But next to a border collie dog or a racehorse or a cheetah, well, we're not that fast, human beings. I have some friends who are very accomplished martial artists, but I wouldn't fancy their chances against a hungry tiger. Human beings, yeah, we can do lots of things. We can run, we can jump, we can climb, we can fight. We can swim. Put us next to a seal and we look like we can barely swim. But when the seal comes out of the water onto the land, we can swim better than the seal can ambulate on land. And so as human beings, our movement capacities are extraordinary for their range. We can do lots of things just about reasonably well. So we have these communicative, expressive capacities, we have these manipulative capacities, and we have these movement capacities. And then we also have the capacity to excrete, and we have the capacity to reproduce, known in Sanskrit as payu, excretion, and upasta, procreation. However, payu and upasta don't just mean defecating, going to the toilet, and making new human beings. Rather, I would say they refer to our capacity to digest, assimilate, and leave behind things that no longer serve us, and our creative capacity, broadly speaking, not just procreation, but also recreation. This amazing capacity we have as human beings to recreate ourselves. Because even though patterns that become established can take on great force of habit, we can change. And one of the best ways to change is through recreation, is through play. Because if you think about it, when we play, the confinements of the game will often invite us to find novel solutions. They will invite us, oblige us almost, to do things that we have not done before. And when we do things we have not done before, we challenge our view of ourselves. So if you see children playing in a playground, they'll be trying things out. And they'll maybe move in ways they've never moved before. And when we move in ways we've never moved before, we actually restructure our brain circuits, which is one of the reasons why it's a great idea to keep practicing new ways of moving. Because this recreational capacity, it doesn't die when you leave school. It just becomes dormant when we stop playing, when we stop exploring. So we're back to the idea of practice looking, practice being in ways that reach beyond our habits. So we have what they call in Sanskrit these karma indriyaha, these divine powers of action that allow us to express, that allow us to pick things up and put things down, not just physical objects, but also ideas, that allow us to move, not just in physical space, but in intellectual space, in imaginative space. We have these, they're just miraculous gifts of consciousness. And we also have the jnana indriyaha, these divine powers of knowing, which are basically equivalent to the five senses, of hearing and feeling, touch sense, of seeing, of tasting and smelling. And these two are quite miraculous. I mean, if you stop and think about it, we're just absolutely incredible. For example, just a couple of hours ago, I had a meal. All these relatively gross objects on the plate, and now my body is transforming them. Do I know how it's doing it? Not really, but my body knows how to do it. It's incredible. So divine powers in the sense that they can transform things, and they allow us to experience, and they also allow us to create and recreate. So the idea in yoga is that you are a miraculous being. And if we allow ourselves to bring all these miraculous powers into togetherness, then we can reform our understanding of who we really are. And the idea in yoga is that basically you are a part of the infinite. And your essence is deathless. So it's the idea that this amazing, miraculous, body-born conscious vehicle is only experiencing because of this conscious essence. A body without a soul, without consciousness, is a corpse. But consciousness, they say, in the Indian tradition, they say a soul without a body is kind of stuck. So the idea in the Indian tradition is, when you have a human body, you're so lucky. So don't miss the opportunity. When you have this amazing gift of a human body with your self-reflexive awareness and these miraculous divine powers of doing and knowing and experiencing, if we work with them and bring them all into togetherness, then they can help us recognize that underlying essential consciousness. And as we remember or recognize that underlying essential consciousness, our fears start to dissolve. Because what do our fears come from, really? We don't like change because we fear death, the biggest change, from being alive to no longer being alive. So if we can overcome that fear, then we're free to live fully now. Time, it doesn't stop. It's devouring everything. But when we don't fear that, then we can be fully present and enjoy the richness of each unfolding moment.